All right, let's get cooking. Welcome to the latest edition of Chin Check Sports Radio. I'm your host, JD. I want to thank you all for taking the time out to join us. And as always, we welcome any suggestions, feedback, comments, and criticisms, which improves the quality of our program, which ultimately improves your listening experience. Before we get started, we want to send everyone our thank yous and our appreciation for your tremendous support. People have been reaching out to us, asking us where have we been. We've kind of been under the radar, of course, watching the playoffs and watching everything that's been transpiring at the beginning of 2021. So we thank you very much for your tremendous support. On this particular episode has been a situation that we have been keeping our eyes on, something that we've been monitoring closely via the news and obviously the mainstream sports media. And this goes into the lack of diversity or the lack of black head coaches in the National Football League. Now, in the fight for social and racial justice, as people jumped on that train in 2020, we have stated repeatedly that this is something that we live. We did not jump on it because it was something to do. We did not jump on it because it was a cool thing to do or it was something to get people elected into political office. This is something that we live every single day. Our program was born out of the concept about unfair reasoning, judgments, criticisms against black professional athletes, and we tend to differ from the mainstream sports media. And as we have talked about before, we are not social justice weekend warriors. You can go back and reference those two programs, parts 1 and part 2. But what was lost in all of the racial equality talk and social justice talk is why the National Football League, which is a billion-dollar business, why there is a lack of black head coaches. And somebody has to explain that to me, and we are going to dive into that on this particular broadcast. Now, before we get started on that, we definitely have to send some rest and power tributes to some very important people who have meant a lot to black society, and that's namely with the recent passing of baseball icon and legend Hammer and Hank Aaron, as well as the recent passing of the iconic Cicely Tyson. There's really nothing else to say about these people other than rest in power for their contributions, being pioneers, them living long lives. I mean, we can go into what Hank Aaron had to go through during his pursuit of Babe Ruth's home run record. There's no telling what Cicely Tyson had to go through, especially as a black actress coming up in the era that she came up in, and no telling what type of discrimination and unfair treatment that she received. But yet, from all appearances, she maintained her dignity and class. And I just want to say to the two of these icons, you both please rest in power. Now, this past NFL offseason, we saw quite a few head coach openings in the NFL, which is standard common practice every single year in the NFL, where they call it Black Monday, which is the Monday after every football season or after the final regular season game. Coaches are handed pink slips and they are fired. So there were jobs that were open with the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Los Angeles Chargers, the Detroit Lions, the New York Jets, the Houston Texans, and the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, the question always comes up about hiring quality coaches, but it just seems that there seems to be only hiring of white quality coaches, and those opportunities are not afforded to black quality coaches. So, and they keep pushing the narrative versus they want a person with experience, and yet they hire the people. So let me go through some of these hires real quick and see if this isn't really an issue. The Los Angeles Chargers hired Brandon Staley, who has only 3 years of NFL level coaching experience and 1 year as a defensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams. Now, this is the Rams team who has possibly the best defensive tackle in the NFL, possibly the best cornerback in the NFL. So you're sitting pretty good as a defensive coordinator. And again, with only 3 years of head coaching experience, he was able to parlay that into a job with Los Angeles Chargers. The Detroit Lions hired Dan Campbell as the head coach. And this man served as the Dolphins interim coach in 2015. I remember Dan Campbell when he played for the Dallas Cowboys during the Bill Parcells era, especially that first season. The New York Jets hired Robert Saleh, the former assistant coach for the San Francisco 49ers. The Philadelphia Eagles hired Nick Sirianni. Now, what's funny about that, running backs coach Deuce Staley, I wondered, did he even get a chance to interview? Now, this man has been with the Philadelphia Eagles since he was a player. I'm talking about going back to 2002 and 2003. I know he might have spent maybe 1 year in Pittsburgh, but always went back to Philadelphia. Definitely was a known Cowboys tormentor. Coach under Andy Reid, coach under Doug Peterson. So what opportunities did he get? Was he promoted in any way? I mean, what chances did he really get? Now, let's go into the Jacksonville Jaguars. You hired Urban Meyer. Again, now people consider that a splash hire, considering Urban Meyer's success at the collegiate level, both leading the Florida Gators as well as the Ohio State Buckeyes to the national championship. So no knock on that. But Urban Meyer has not coached, and he's been on television for 2 years and now has gotten a professional head coaching job with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And by the way, Urban Meyer, the same Urban Meyer who left Ohio State under questionable circumstances, the same Urban Meyer who you can make an argument left Florida under questionable circumstances, the same Urban Meyer who coached the late convicted murderer Aaron Hernandez, has now gotten a job in the NFL. Is going to have the number 1 pick, and obviously that pick is going to go to Trevor Lawrence. Now this goes into the head coach of the Houston Texans, Baltimore assistant David Culley, again, who just completed his 27th season as an NFL coach, and now is getting a job for the Houston Texans. Now you can say that is one of 4 minority head coaches in the NFL. So out of 32 teams, if you count David Culley, that is 4 minority head coaches. And I really want to go back, and I really want you all to understand how serious this problem really is. The NFL, as we know it, they just completed their 100th season during the 2019 season. So if you want to add this season, you folks want to take a wild guess how many black coaches have actually coached in the NFL in their 101 years of existence? I'll wait. And I'm tired of waiting. Folks, that number is a grand total of 20. Let that sink in, ladies and gentlemen. The National Football League that has been around for hundreds of years, for over 100 years, that is clearly the most popular sport in America by a marathon. No other sport even comes close. In their 100 years, considering all the top athletes that have the Hall of Famers, the icons that have come through the National Football League, only 20 black head coaches. Folks, if that's not a problem, I don't know what is. Rooney rules be damned. And that's another thing that we're going to touch on. It was kind of sad, the fact that the NFL had to create a Rooney rule that forced teams to have to interview a minority candidate. It wasn't even hired to at least interview one minority candidate. Because again, the problem was so rampant that black coaches were not even getting an interview, a look at, was that they had to create a rule for teams that they had to interview at least one minority candidate. Suffice to say that pretty much served as token interviews where you might have interviewed maybe one black candidate just to fill your quota, just to check off a box and say that you did it. And the problem even got worse where they literally had to give people some type of incentive for hiring a black head coach, whether it be extra draft picks or more salary cap space. But the league even tried to implement some type of incentive for teams to hire black head coaches. Again, in a football league that is 70% black, I can make an argument 75, 80% black. you have so few black head coaches again from 1920 until now. So you figure 100 years in the NFL, only 20 black head coaches. Let that sink in. Folks, let me give you a little bit of a history lesson here. The first ever black coach was a man by the name of Fritz Pollard, who is now in the Football Hall of Fame. He was the head coach of the Akron Pros of the American Professional Football Association. Folks, this is going back to 1920, 1921. That was a player as well as a coach. So this man was a coach when the NFL was not even the NFL. It was the American Professional Football Association, which later became the National Football League in 1922. So that is the first time we've had a black head coach in what we know as professional football in 1920, 1921. Let that sink in for a minute. And again, it wasn't even the NFL at that time. Now you figure from the 1920s until 1989 is when you had your second black head coach. Folks, let that sink in. From 1920 or 1921 until 1989, you had no other black head coaches. That is during the time. Now, let's go through this time period. That is the Jim Brown era, the Gale Sayers era, the O.J. Simpson era, the Eric Dickerson era. Think of all these icons who are literally considered some of the greatest football players who ever lived. And yet, no black head coaches. The Jerry Rice era. Lawrence Taylor was drafted during that time frame. Mike Singletary. So again, you clearly, for a 60, almost 70 year span, you had no black head coaches in the NFL. And that distinction goes to Art Shell, the Hall of Famer Art Shell of the Los Angeles Raiders. That's a problem, ladies and gentlemen. That's a serious problem. I think a lot of you listening now, that's just started to sink in. From 1920 until 1989, there were no black head coaches in the NFL. After Fritz Pollard, then you have Art Shell, who was a very successful coach. Your third black head coach was not until we got to the late Dennis Green. And for those of you who don't know who Dennis Green is, he's most famously known for We Are Who We Thought They Were when he was a coach of the Arizona Cardinals, and they lost, I don't know how they lost his game, to the Chicago Bears, and he was upset at the press conference, and he slammed against the podium and said the Bears, they are who we thought they were. That's how most modern fans know Dennis Green. I know Dennis Green for being a wonderful and great head coach of the Minnesota Vikings in the late 80s and early 90s, going to the early 2000s, and only having one losing season. I also remember the late Denny Green as the coach who actually drafted Randy Moss, considering that Randy Moss had all of his problems in college, being kicked out of two schools, Notre Dame as well as Florida State, going to Marshall. And he's the one who took a chance on Randy Moss, and I can even make an argument, took a chance on Chris Carter with all of his issues. But we're going to focus more on Randy because he's the one that truly gave Randy a shot in the NFL when he was passed over by 20-something other teams or whatever number of teams he was passed on, including the Dallas Cowboys. That's a problem, folks. The fourth black head coach was Ray Rhodes, the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. If you don't know who Ray Rhodes is, Ray Rhodes was the defensive coordinator of the San Francisco 49ers team who won Super Bowl 29 with Steve Young, Jerry Rice, and Deion Sanders, and Ken Norton, and Lee Woodall, and Merton Hanks, and Eric Davis, and Tim McDonald, and Brian Stubblefield, and Dana Stubblefield, Brian Young, Gary Plummer. Folks, he was the defensive coordinator of that team that people tend to forget. Again, you talk about all the offensive players, but they truly had a good defense with a lot of good playmakers. Ray Rhodes was a coordinator of that defense who got a job as the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. I also want to go back to Dennis Green also. You want to talk about giving people a shot? Think of Dante Culpepper, the former Vikings quarterback. He was drafted by Dennis Green. So going in no other particular order here, some other great black head coaches, and you can really say from the Denny Green tree would be Hall of Famer Tony Dungy. Turned around a moribund Tampa Bay Buccaneers franchise where they were just awful, had the pieces in place, the Warren Sapps, the Derek Brooks, the John Lynches, the Warwick Dunns, the Mike Allstocks, the Ronnie Barbers, had a squad, turned that team that was putrid and pathetic and moribund, made them contenders. They couldn't advance. Personally, I think that was due to more of, I would say more of offensive ineptitude. Could only reach a certain point, but here's what I find funny. When this man took this team, built that team up, got them to what it needed to be, they shipped him out the door, and they brought in John Gruden, who won that Super Bowl with all of Tony Dungy's players. Now, the same Tony Dungy who took his talents and went to Indianapolis and won a Super Bowl with Indianapolis Colts, which is Peyton Manning's first Super Bowl. So clearly Tony Dungy is in the Hall of Fame. He is the architect of that Tampa 2 defense that teams still run till this day. Again, drafting those players, building that Tampa Bay franchise up. I know with them being in the Super Bowl, there's a lot of feel-good moments with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I don't have a problem with that. But going back in history to what Tony Dungy accomplished with that team, building that team up from nothing to something, perennial playoff team, always there, always having a top defense, and they ship him out the door. You bring another coach, but he takes his talents and wins another Super Bowl elsewhere, and he's now in the Hall of Fame. Another notable head coach, folks, we're going to go down the line here, Marvin Lewis. Let's go to Marvin Lewis here. Folks, people forget Marvin Lewis was the defensive coordinator of the 2000 Ravens. So that great Ravens team with Ray Lewis, Tony Siragusa, Michael McCrary, Bull Ware, I'm thinking of some of these other guys here off the top of my head. Sam Adams. I believe Jamie Sharp was on that team. That team, again, can make an argument of possibly the greatest defense of all time, or at least in the conversation with the 85 Bears, maybe the 2002 Bucks. I would actually take the 2000 Ravens over them. Marvin Lewis was the defensive coordinator of that team. Let's not get it twisted here. Then took his talents to a Washington Redskins team and made them the #1 overall ranked defense when he had a LeVar Arrington on that team. Now, Marvin Lewis became the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, who were a putrid, pathetic, probably even worse than the Buccaneers in terms of ineptitude. Now, we're talking the Cincinnati Bengals, who were known as the Bungles, who pretty much were seen as a bye week on everybody's schedule, where you pretty much can play your backups and still win, where it literally was a bye week. Now, you talk about turning garbage into something where you drafted the right players, you drafted the Carson Palmers, the Chad Ochocinco's, the TJ Hushmanzadas. I forget they had a running back. I believe that was Rudy Johnson. No, they had a running back and Rudy Johnson. They drafted the Robert Gethers and drafted some quality players, Geno Atkins. Quality players that they drafted. Now, again, turn that team into a perennial playoff team. Again, it's the Cincinnati Bengals, who were awful during the 90s. When I tell you awful, with Jeff Blake and Kajana Carter and Lord knows whoever else was on that team, with Akili Smith, awful. Now we get to Marvin Lewis, turn the team around. They're in the playoffs every year. A knock on Marvin Lewis was he never won a playoff game. But again, when you have the success and you did what Marvin Lewis did to turn that team around, it says a lot about this man, and why has he not gotten a second shot in the NFL is really beyond me. We'll go next to next black head coach, Hugh Jackson. Let's go to Lovie Smith. Lovie Smith, the former head coach of the Chicago Bears, who coached against the aforementioned Tony Dungy in the Super Bowl when his Bears lost to Dungy's Colts. I personally believe, I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent, that if the quarterback Rex Grossman could handle snaps under center, the Bears will probably win that Super Bowl, but that's neither here nor there. Lovie Smith, again, another guy who had his team in the playoffs constantly. Again, with that great defense in 2006, again, with a little bit better quarterback play, he would have gotten a lot further. Again, I don't know why Lovie has not gotten another job in the NFL. We'll go next with Hall of Famer Mike Singletary, who is the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers. We'll go into, and of course, Mike Singletary is the famous, I'd rather play with 10 men versus playing with 11. If one can't sold out, one is not sold out to be a part of the team. Can win with them, can coach with them, can do it. And he said, I need guys that want to win. If you want to see what else is important, look at what Vernon Davis became when Mike Singletary was out. They bring in Jim Harbaugh, and now they're going to 3 straight NFC Championship games, including Super Bowls. And Vernon Davis, for a minute there, was probably their best offensive weapon. Thank Mike Singletary for that. Herman Edwards. Herman Edwards, again, took over a listless Jets franchise, took them to playoffs all the time. I go back to that 2004 season, which was Ben Roethlisberger's rookie season, where the Jets should have won that playoff game against the Steelers in Pittsburgh if a kicker can actually make kicks. And Herman Edwards is now a coach on the collegiate level, but Herman Edwards is the hello, you played to win the game. That's where most fans know of Herman Edwards. They probably know him from ESPN as well. But Herman Edwards, and again, coming from New Jersey, I watched a lot of Jets games. So, of course, I got to know Herman Edwards, and I thought he was a great guy and a great coach for the New York Jets, especially dealing with the New York market. Jim Caldwell. Jim Caldwell led Peyton Manning to his second Super Bowl, where they lost, where Peyton Manning threw the game-losing interception to the New Orleans Saints. Now, Jim Caldwell, to me, is one that really pisses me off, because Jim Caldwell took a Detroit Lions team, had a winning record, took them to 2 playoffs, was fired, again, had a winning record, took a team to 2 playoffs. I was actually at one of those games where they played the Cowboys in the 2014 season, and he was let go. You're bringing Matt Patricia, who was pathetic as a head coach, and you fired Matt Patricia, and now you're bringing Dan Campbell. Maybe had you stuck with Jim Caldwell, you wouldn't be in this position that you are now. Just throwing it out there. Some other head coaches, Todd Bowles, who head coach of the New York Jets, who's now the defensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who might have a shot at winning the Super Bowl. Denver head coach Vance Joseph, who only coached for 2 seasons. I'll even throw a little bit of trivia at you. Even though I said 20 black head coaches, and that's full-time, I'll even throw in an interim black head coach. That was Eric Studeville, who was the predecessor for one Vance Joseph. You got Steve Wilkes, who was coach for 1 season of the Arizona Cardinals. Folks, 1 season, Steve Wilkes was the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. They gave that brother 1 damn season. Moving right along. Romeo Crennel, who was one of the architects of those great Giants teams in the 80s and early 90s, was the defensive coordinator of that first of the Belichick championship teams, was the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, had them with a winning record 1 season, took over as the interim head coach of the Houston Texans. Let's go to Raheem Morris, who was a head coach as well. Leslie Frazier, who was the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, who led them to the playoffs and was supposed to be in the running for a head coaching, or had interviews with the Houston Texans for their head coaching job. He is now the defensive coordinator of the Buffalo Bills. Former head coach Anthony Lynn, who was fired by the LA Chargers. Again, this is a guy who was repeatedly taking the team to the playoffs, had an older quarterback in one Phillip Rivers, clearly had his best years behind him, brought in a rookie quarterback. What did you guys expect? But again, he was taking the team to the playoffs on a consistent basis, which leads us to the 2 current black coaches in the NFL. One, Brian Flores of the Miami Dolphins, and Mike Tomlin of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So if you count current black head coaches, Brian Flores and Mike Tomlin, and by the way, I think Pittsburgh is dying to run Mike Tomlin out of town, but the same Mike Tomlin who has gone to 2 Super Bowls, he's won a Super Bowl, yet every chance you get, I think people really want to run Tomlin out of town. And I don't understand that. He's a great head coach. Brian Flores is an up-and-coming head coach. And again, Mike Tomlin, no scandals behind him, no issues behind him, and I just don't understand that. So we only have 3 black head coaches in the NFL. Brian Flores, Mike Tomlin, David Culley. Now, if you're going to throw in some, quote, minority, you can throw in Robert Saleh, as well as the head coach of the Washington football team, Ron Rivera. So again, we're talking about black. We're not doing minorities. We're doing black head coach. I have 3 out of 32 teams in the NFL. That's a problem. Folks, another problem that I also see is 2 black GMs. Terry Fontenot of the Atlanta Falcons, who recently got the job, and you only had one other black GM, and that's Chris Greer of the Miami Dolphins, and you see the job that he's doing over there. Again, this is a problem, ladies and gentlemen. A serious problem, folks, and go back and Google all the names that I gave you and look up that is the amount of black head coaches in the NFL, and that's a serious problem. Now, why is that? Some of the reasons are sometimes, again, you don't even get to interview as a black coach. You don't really get elevated where you might be stuck as a running backs coach or wide receivers coach. Go back and take a look. Well, go take a look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Every coordinator that they have is black. Offensive coordinator is Byron Leftwich. Defensive coordinator is Todd Bowles. Look at the Kansas City Chiefs, which is the strength, is their offense. Eric Bieniemy, now 3 straight championship games, 2 consecutive Super Bowls, is not even getting the shot. And I don't want to hear anything about, well, they don't want to interview him until the season is over. It's been done before. You constantly hear that teams want coaches with head coaching experience. Then they explain Urban Meyer, who was out of football for 2 years on the collegiate level, and he now gets a head coaching job in the NFL. So that's a bunch of malarkey. I notice sometimes that if a black coordinator is a hot candidate, he'll maybe get an interview, but then as soon as his offense doesn't perform, his defense doesn't perform, he might lose his job. Now, all of a sudden, you no longer hear from him. And let's go to, I believe, I'm going to say Jets coordinator Ted Thompson, who back in 04-05, I think for a period of time was actually a hot coordinator, had maybe one bad season, and that was the end of that, never really got another shot again. Another defensive coordinator was a guy by the name of Donnie Henderson, who coached for the Jets, was a Jets defensive coordinator. I believe went to the Lions, and you never heard from that brother ever again. So it makes you wonder, when they are hot assistants, they stay as assistants. The next thing you know, offense doesn't do well. The team is besieged by injuries. The defense doesn't play well. They're besieged by injuries. All of a sudden, you're no longer a hot candidate. You're no longer a hot coordinator. You tend to fall off the damn radar. And also, too, and I've been saying this for the longest, part of the responsibility falls on you, the players. Even though we at Chin Check Radio are pro athlete, I have to put some of the onus on some of the black players, and it's going to be a very unpopular thing I'm going to say, but damn it, it has to be said. Here's why I put it on some of these black players, and we've said this before. Black folks have a thing where we will show our ass to another black person, but we will get in line for a white person with the quickness. And for some of you guys who play ball like I did, you all probably going to agree with what I'm saying. When a black coach tells you to move, tells you to push yourself, you want to have attitude, you want to push back. But when a white coach comes to town, you're running extra sprints, you're staying late, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing for the white head coach. Now, let's look no further than one Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown was in Pittsburgh with Mike Tomlin. You Facebook Live-in post-game interviews from the locker room, and you're doing this with no compunction. I mean, just nonchalant about it, and you just didn't give it in. You're knocking, you're throwing water bottles and damn near fighting position coaches and stuff like that. They bust you out of town. You're a little bit more respectful in Oakland. They kick you out of Oakland. You go to New England. You stay on your P's and Q's. You're out of football for a year. Now you're with Tampa Bay. Now all of a sudden you're a model teammate. But you were showing your ass to the black head coach, James Harrison. James Harrison, the former great Steelers linebacker. He's one of my favorite players of all time. I enjoy watching his workout routine. Definitely, it motivates me. I definitely practice a lot of his exercise that he does, but I have to call out James Harrison on this as well. When he played his final season for the New England Patriots and he went to the Super Bowl and they lost, he was interviewed. And he says, and he felt that Bill Belichick ran a tighter, more disciplined ship than Mike Tomlin did. And I had a couple of issues with that because James Harrison went to his 2 Super Bowls, well, at least one, his first Super Bowl with Mike Tomlin in 2008. He's Defensive Player of the Year under Mike Tomlin. Has the greatest defensive play in Super Bowl history, maybe except the Malcolm Butler interception, under Mike Tomlin. Went to a second Super Bowl under Mike Tomlin. So got a lot of his accolades, a lot of who we know as James Harrison got it under Mike Tomlin. By the way, Mike Tomlin never had any Deflategate scandals, never had any Spygate scandals, but yeah, you had draft picks taken away from them, fined X amount of money, but you want to tell me, I'm sorry, had murderers on the roster, but you want to tell me that Bill Belichick, with all these scandals that he's had, runs a tighter ship than Mike Tomlin. I had serious issues with that. I had a lot of issues with that. And I go back to Mike Singletary when he was coaching the San Francisco 49ers, talking to his players, motivating the players. I believe he tried to pull his pants down as some type of motivation. You clearly saw on the sideline the players cussing Mike Singletary out. Now, Mike Singletary is one of the greatest linebackers of all time. The very next year, they bring in Jim Harbaugh, the white guy as a coach. All of a sudden, everybody falling in line. All of a sudden now you're quiet, you listen to the coach, you want to do what you're supposed to do. So again, I have to put some of this on the black players. And really, it's a black person thing. How many times as a black person do we tell another black person something, it gets disregarded, it gets laughed at, it gets brushed aside. But then when a white person comes and tell you the same exact thing that a black person tells you, all of a sudden, black folks act like it's the deepest thing in the world. So again, from black society, obviously, naturally, is going to filter down into your professional sports, especially in the sport of football, where again, you would give a black head coach a hard time. I look at some of the players from the Cincinnati Bengals. Chad Ochocinco had a lot to say when he was playing with the Cincinnati Bengals. You wearing Hall of Fame jackets, you doing mariachi dances. I believe there was one play where they were playing the Falcons, and he was mad because even though he scored a touchdown, but he was mad because it wasn't on the player who he wanted to score on. He really sulked on the sideline behind that. But when he went to New England, all of a sudden you're quiet. All of a sudden you're not saying anything. All of a sudden you're falling in line again, because when the white coach could replace your black ass, all of a sudden you want your P's and Q's. But when it's a black coach, you want to show out and you want to make it about you. I'll say to a certain extent too, Randy Moss, he has some instances in Minnesota as well. You go to New England, all of a sudden now you on your best behavior. Just throwing it out there. Okay? So, and I believe, wasn't Hugh Jackson a coach in Oakland when he was there? I have to do my research on that. But again, Randy, when you had Denny Green who gave you a chance, you are squirting people with water bottles, straight cash, homie, and you play when you want to play, and you're not giving forth the effort. You kind of doing what you want to do in damn Minnesota. But when you got to New England, all of a sudden you're showing up on time. And remember that one time where I believe a bunch of the players came late to practice and they were snowed in, and Belichick didn't want to hear it. And Randy Moss said, I want to be a Patriot. And Belichick shipped him out of town with the quickness. So again, when it's the black head coach, y'all like to show out. But when it's a white head coach, all of a sudden, now we want to fall in line. So if you want to talk about some of the reasons why we've only had 20 black head coaches, at least full-time head coaches, in 100 years of the NFL, those are some of the reasons why. Definitely let me know what you think about this. I very rarely ask to leave comments in the comment section, but if you feel free, just go ahead and knock yourself out. Definitely check us out on Twitter at @radio_chin. At @radio_chin. So definitely check us out. This definitely has been a fun broadcast. And until the next time.